Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Page Turners Plus. Today, we'll be discussing and reflecting on Kevin Jared Hosein's Hungry Ghosts. To tell you a bit more about Hungry Ghosts and Kevin Jared Hosein, we have Kesua.
Kevin Jared Hosein is a Caribbean novelist and short story writer from Trinidad and Tobago who's also a science teacher. He is best known for winning the 2018 Commonwealth Short Story Prize, the most global literary prize in the world, with his short story Passage. He also won the regional Caribbean section of the prize in 2015 with The King of Settlement, and Hungry Ghosts is his first adult novel and his third novel. Hungry Ghosts is a coming of age story rooted in Trinidad's rural landscape and inspired by oral storytelling traditions. It's a compelling whodunit exploring the roots and ripple effects of generational trauma and linked histories, the lingering resentments, sacrifices, and longings which alter destinies, and the consequences of perceived power and powerlessness. In the 1940s, depicting the impact of American occupation and British colonialism, Kevin Hosein's Hungry Ghost is a searing novel about wealth and poverty, class, family, and historical violence. It's lyrically told and rendered with harrowing beauty. It's a stunning piece of storytelling and an affecting mystery from a blazingly talented writer. In short, Hungry Ghost is a page turner. Thank you, RJ.
No pun intended at all. But I think we could jump off where you mentioned that it is a story of perceived power and powerlessness. So the question that I have for the panel is, how significant do you think the collision of wealth, as in the Shangors in the novel, with poverty, as in the Barak families, is to the social and behavioral dynamics of the characters portrayed in the novel? I don't know who wants to jump off there. I feel like it would be interesting. Any historians, sociologists?
Well, actually, I have a degree in sociology and two in history, so I guess this would be this would be my question to begin with. Yeah, I think the definitely we see that clash throughout, um, but I think it's definitely more complex than just the clash of it. It's also about how these people attain wealth, especially the character Dalton Changor. Uh, we get bits and pieces of how he attained wealth, and it from the text, it seems like he got it through the back door. It was he did some unsavory things and continued to do some unsavory things to build his wealth, almost like a gangster character. Um, and it doesn't seem like he came from a wealthy family. Um, I would contrast or bring in the Badris. It seems like they may have been uh, of a wealthy class, maybe from a generation, but definitely we do see the contrast in that Changor and then his wife Marley are. I mean, they sit figuratively on this hill, and they employ people in the surrounding area, and it's almost like a plantation uh, enslaved person type of relationship. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that the question of Dalton and Marley is her name, um, being sort of nouveau riche. But the amount of difference there is between them and the other people that they employ is really astounding because essentially, what is a few months' wages, he's able to be offered suddenly for a 2-week job because they need him to do something. And it's kind of a picture of how some people have so much and some people have real little in comparison, and I think he does that really well to draw these really stark comparisons. So much so that obviously that changes the way that people perceive themselves and their position in society so fundamentally and, with tragic consequences.
Okay, what I found interesting was the similarities between people regardless of class. They had all experienced trauma. They all had, I suppose, because they had traumatic pasts, serious serious difficulties in the way they relate to other human beings. And I also found that social exclusion had very little to do with wealth, because even within the barrack society, the people of the barracks excluded the twins on the basis of the sins of their father. So I think the novel suggests that social exclusion is not something that's confined um, to different, or that is uh, that comes from differences in class, in your class position, but it even within the same community, that we as human beings do that to each other.
I think the way he draws on loneliness as a trope throughout the novel as well is another part of that. That people can feel like they're a part of a community, but within that space still feel very lonely. I'm thinking of the reflections of Sweater at the end, where she's watching the proceedings happen, and I think Lata, the young lady, who she's watching what's going on around her in the community, and she feels very distant from people because she's deeply grieving where other people are sort of enjoying a big time to get together. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I was particularly interested what Eric also said about the plantation similarity with that nucleus of power in a small village, right? And I see it, I have seen it, and I've seen remnants of it today, where in a small village, you've got this family living in sort of plantation house, and they were landowners of the past, and how that influences the dynamic of the village is quite interesting. You know, everything almost seems to get its reference from that one physical structure and the family that occupies that place. And I saw a lot of that in the Shangu's, you know, residents and what obtained there with the rest of the village. So I like that comparison that Eric drew out.
Yeah, I agree there. Especially in terms of the sort of constant, well, I would call the concentration of power with Dalton and Mali. That and I found it quite strange as well how, and I don't want to give any spoilers, how Mali ended up in towards the end of the story because of her origins. It's not as if she came from wealth by any means, but then she suddenly runs into the ill-gotten gains of her husband, and she becomes what I would call, let me not preface any, let me not say anything, but she becomes a terrible person. That's all I could say there. But then I also like the style of Kevin Jarrett Hossein, because you get the sense that this was a plantation, but he never really refers to it as a plantation in the story. He says, the farm, these three guys worked on the farm, and Dalton Shango was in charge of the farm. So that I guess it was open for reader interpretation to say, well, this is a post-colonial society, so this is probably the remnant of a plantation. So I liked that.
It's not a post-colonial
Yeah.
society. It's very much a colonial society. Don't forget,
Well,
it's
okay, yeah,
1940s
post-slavery.
Trinidad. It's
Post, yeah,
exactly. It's a
post-emancipation
post-emancipation,
society. Yeah,
but it's
my
and
bad.
he's very much grappling
Yeah.
with the legacies of colonialism and
Mm.
slavery, or legacies of the patterns of colonialism in the late colonial period. I suppose is what I'm trying to say.
And
Yeah.
I think I should point. Sorry, I just want to point out that plantations still exist in the Caribbean. It's just that we call them estates.
Yeah, or hotels.
Great houses, get married there. I mean, one of the things that I thought was really interesting was the tension he builds through what I like to think of the indecent proposal, right? Does anyone remember this film from the 1990s, I think, with Robert De Niro and not Robert De Niro, Robert Redford? Did anyone else read it? Because that's what came to mind when I was thinking about it. So it's a film
Indecent
where
proposal.
Indecent Proposal.
I think I remembered.
Yeah.
Mm.
It was a bit of a B movie, but they had flashy trailers because it was like, well, do you let me sleep with your wife if I gave you $1 million? And that's sort of a little bit
Yeah,
at the
no,
center of this novel in some ways as well, where
Oh,
Paula disagrees with me. When
no.
because it's for work, he has to go and part of his job, he's asked to stay in the main house overnight for a change, and that's what kind of kicks off a series of events. Do you not
But
read it the same way?
he was attracted to her as well from the very beginning. Nobody forced him to do this.
But why did his wife agree to it? Because he
She
promised the
agreed to.
land.
Yes, she wanted. She just thought he was going to get a job that was going
were
to give
poor.
them some quick money. I
Right.
don't think there was any suspicion on her part. There were other people suggesting it, but
Right.
she didn't suspect that there were anything improper was going to happen.
Loosely
I did.
based.
Yeah. I think probably not a complete comparison with Indecent Proposal, Kesuwa, but when that section started to develop, I was thinking to myself, is this gonna go where I think it's leading? And I brush it off and thought, just like Shweta did, like, no, I mean, that can't be it. And
I was begging them. I was begging them. Don't do it.
Don't do
Just
it, eh?
don't do it. Because unlike you, Kesawa, I don't think Marley was a horrible person. I quite liked her.
Mm.
Oh no, sorry, it wasn't you. It was Raul J who said she became a horrible person. I quite liked Marley. Marley reminded me of Gina in What a Mother's Love Don't Teach You. I think they were very similar characters. Their motivations were certainly similar, and their behaviors were similar. Um,
Remind me who Gina is. I'm having a blank.
Gina, it was a young
Apollo's
lady in,
girlfriend.
yes, well, yes, the young lady who decided that Apollo was going to be her baby daddy. Yeah,
But I mean, I like how we're speaking now about Mali, but I guess we could speak about the other half to the Shangor family, and we central to the story was sort of the story of Dalton Shangor, but he remains a mysterious character. Do you think he's an underdeveloped character, or did you like that aspect of the novel? I see Tony smiling.
Well, the short answer to that question for me is no. I don't think he was underdeveloped. I think I got to know just enough of him to set the whole tone of understanding Mali and um, just really, it was established that he was a seedy character, as Eric said in the beginning. His wealth was from ill-gotten gains, that was enough for me to move on. And so, no, I don't think he was underdeveloped as a character.
actually, I think he was brilliant. I think he was a brilliant literary device. The way the fact that he didn't tell us very much about him, was very telling because he is shady. If you know very little about a shady character, that is actually a very good way of presenting a shady character. Another thing about Dalton Shangor is that he is primarily a catalyst. I think he's less important as a character than he is as a catalyst. He's probably the most important catalyst in the novel.
Yeah, I agree there in terms of him being an important catalyst because even towards the end, his presence was still felt in all the actions of the people of the barricade. So I think yeah, it was important. He was not sent. Well, let me put it. He was central to the story, but he didn't dominate it. He wasn't the main character or anything like that. So yeah,
Who's
I think
But
conspicuously
Roger,
absent. Yeah.
as a supplementary question, I don't want to
Mhm.
sound as if I'm in Parliament, but how much of Dalton you think was responsible for who Mali was and who Mali manifested to be in the novel? How much of what we know about Dalton is responsible for what Mali was manifested to be in the novel? I don't know if that's a fair question.
numerically, I would say 25% because because the thing is, I feel like a lot of who Mali became started in I think it was it I think it was Port of Spain. I don't know if it was mentioned as being Port of Spain, but her life in the hotel
Shagrams,
motel,
Shagrams,
yes,
down
Chagram,
at the American
yeah,
base.
at the
Yeah.
American base. I think a lot of her life was influenced by what happened there at the American base. So I don't think Dalton necessarily shaped Mali to become the person she was, but that was already on the line. Maybe he brought it out more, because I don't get the impression that Dalton was a good husband in any way.
But Dalton deliberately did a Pygmalion. He deliberately created a My Fair Lady character, and she felt imprisoned. Marley felt imprisoned by the person that he required her to be. So that was clearly a very important one of the reasons that she was not in any hurry to find him when he disappeared.
Can I ask, related to that? Do we have any? Did anybody else get a better sense than I did of the relationship between Dalton and the twins' father? Were they brothers?
I didn't
No,
think they
I don't think
were.
they were
No,
I
brothers.
think
No,
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 I
they
they
think
just
they
were
belong.
they were
They both
rivals.
belong to.
they were
Yeah,
rivals. They were
they,
yeah.
yeah,
business
business
rivals,
rivals.
basically, because yeah, um,
But they have the same
yeah,
name, right? They have the same
mm,
surname.
no,
No,
no, no,
no,
I thought they
no,
did.
no,
mm-mm,
The twins
no,
are
no.
Lockhart.
Lacan,
They have
Lacan.
the
Lacan.
same surname. The same surname. They were also
No,
no.
the twin surname is Lacan, and Dalton is a Shangor.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The downsides of the audiobook. Sometimes you miss things.
No, they were, yeah, they were business rivals. Because the twins' father had his business, and he was told not to ever mess with Shangor's business, otherwise people would come for him. I think that was their only relation, right?
Simply
Yeah.
because, in terms of how they treated their wives, they had very similar relationships. Felt they were both very domineering men, and the women felt similarly kind of stuck in the situation that they couldn't get out of, with different consequences for both women because of the types of men they were married to. But the
Yeah, but
relationships were actually really
they were
similar.
both sociopaths, and the fact that they were sociopaths is good for for the kinds of careers they had. It's probably quite a requirement for those kinds of careers.
but but then I kind of want to throw out the question here, Keswa, because you sort of mentioned the dysfunctional marriages that they had, or dysfunctional romantic relationships between Dalton and Marley and oh gosh, the twins' father and his wife. Do you think that's a sort of symptom of the 1940s, or I mean, it still happens today, but do you think it was more commonplace in the 1940s?
Absolutely not. You still get very abusive relationships today. I don't think that's something unique to that time. Um, no, I don't think it's a historical relic. I think it's a depiction of relationships where people don't care about each other,
Yeah,
or people are in them for all sorts of reasons that are not a healthy interest in the other person.
you're right.
Right, because if I remember correctly, they both literally found these women, took them out of wherever they were, and then tried to make them into what they wanted. Like the twins' father just wanted a mother for wanted someone to bear him children. That was her role, right? And Shangar wanted, basically a Barbie doll in his house.
There was a
So
big difference. At least Marley had some choice in whether
right,
she would become
she
his
would be
wife,
right
to become
because yes,
Shangor's wife.
yes,
Um, the twins' mother had no
mm,
choice about it.
absolutely.
Well,
And
also I
she
think
was
aren't they
stripped
forced
of
into the
of all of
circumstances?
her identity. Like she was completely stripped of her identity, completely. The twins' mother, I mean.
And we
But
can't we
Kessa,
can't
where you were,
forget. No, I'm
I
sorry.
think I think I got the impression the way that Hossein tells the story is that they're both coerced in different ways. Marley has a degree of choice that the other white lady, who remains nameless, I think, throughout the story, never has, and it's a much more violent relationship that she experiences, and a much more kind of bitter pill to swallow in terms of her life. She's literally kidnapped and held captive, essentially. But to a certain degree, like you say, Marley feels trapped. Now, it's not the same. I'm not suggesting it is by any stretch of the imagination. But what I'm saying is, both men, like you say, create a woman, they take a human and turn them into what they need them to be, and both women are forced to live within the confines of what this man has allowed them to be. That's the similarity. I'm not suggesting the two relationships are identical in any other way.
I mean, the nuances are there, but I mean, it's definitely a strong degree of patriarchy and misogyny. I mean,
Absolutely.
that's what we're talking about, and we can't forget Hans's father and his mother. The relationship that they had was,
and Hans's brother, and
yeah,
almost every relationship in the
yeah,
barracks.
yeah.
Except for the relationship between Hans and Sweater, which seems to be a genuinely loving one until flipping Marley comes along.
Until until
So wait, how
yeah.
you blaming Marley? I don't
Yeah, it's
understand this.
not
How old
Marley's
was Hans?
fault.
Paula,
Hans was not 8.
With
He
her
was not
none of
8 years
them,
indecent
old.
none of
proposal,
them
if
are
I give
without
you
blame.
3 months' wages and you can buy the house you've been promising your wife
I
for
think both.
how
I
many
think
years, will you come and stay in the big house?
both of them, both
But
of
he
them
didn't
have
start
their
off staying
intentions.
in the big house though. He wasn't staying in the big house. He was staying in what they were calling the homestead, which is like,
Yeah,
I
but that
guess,
was just
a
the enticement.
but anyway, I have to say that
Can you wear
I
my
actually
husband's
had an
clothes?
inkling from the very beginning when in the beginning when she was describing the three men working
Mhm.
and talking about the fact that there was one that she had things in common with, and I was like, what's this about? And yes, so
Yeah,
I think that
Kevin
I
did
think
give it. Sorry.
Marley had designs on him from the very beginning, and Hans somehow ended up swept up in
Somehow.
whatever.
All you're giving,
What's it
all
somehow?
No,
you're giving
Somehow.
Hans
no,
too
you're
many
right. No, you're right.
excuses.
You're right. I shouldn't give him an excuse. I guess I was surprised that it, given the relationship he had with Shweta, I don't know if I'm
Yeah,
pronouncing it
and
correctly.
I think
It was surprising.
that's a
But
brilliant
yeah, I mean,
part.
totally.
Yeah.
He's not, no excuses. Like, he's a grown man. He knew what he was doing. I
And
mean,
that's a brilliant part of the text because we have this sympathetic figure in Hans, and he's and Hussein contrasts him so well with the other men in the novel that this kind of takes the reader by surprise. But it shouldn't have taken us by surprise because of the whole situation, this unresolved conflict that he and Shweta had after the death of their daughter, their baby
Yeah.
daughter.
Yeah.
That's the thread, and that comes out at the end, where it really comes to a head, and it's this breakthrough. But it's, you know, the glass has been shattered, the foundation has been crumbled. So
But there
Yeah,
was a
there's
bit of a
that.
setup. There was a bit of a setup. I think, as you said, Eric, the Hussein was painting initially, anyway, to me, this picture of Hans as being better than what he did in the end. And that's why it dropped you. Um, and that's why Paula was begging, please don't, because she didn't want to be disappointed, you know.
No, that's right. That's right. I mean,
He
and
was a big man
one of the
standing.
really great things about this novel is how it shows you that good people can make really poor choices. I mean, and we all do it. We all are. Most human beings are fundamentally decent human beings, but we can all make poor choices. Depending on your circumstances, and like Eric said, one of the reasons he made a poor choice was because he and I was pronouncing her name Shweta. I don't know how
Sweeter,
to pronounce it.
sweeter, I don't know.
Whatever. He and his wife had an unresolved issue, which it was very important to resolve, and they just couldn't resolve it because I guess it was a hard emotional issue to grapple with.
Mhm. I know we're all
So
just
that
itching to go to the reading, but sorry, Paula, I didn't want to cut you off there.
No,
What
no.
no, go
I just
ahead.
wanted to get in one thing as we at this point. Kesso had mentioned indecent proposal at the beginning, but anybody remember seeing a movie called Someone to Watch Over Me? Okay, well, leave it there. It's just a movie about
the
a
boxer.
woman who had a police station by her house because her life was under threat, and that became a relationship similar to Hans and Mali, and the family of the policeman suffered a similar sort of, especially the son, right? Krishna is his name, you know,
Krishna.
Krishna,
Krishna.
right? So you saw that dynamic in that movie, which it is sad. It was sad. There's a lot of sadness to that, you know. Anyway, back to you, Roger.
I think this would be a good time to take the reading by Kevin Jared Hussein. We've had a lovely first half of our discussion. Stay tuned.
Hello, my name is Kevin Gerard Hussein, and I'm the author of Hungry Ghosts. I'm about to read an excerpt from chapter 3. There are three main characters involved here: Hans, the father, Krishna, his son, and Tarak, Hans's nephew and Krishna's cousin. They are about to enter a store in the nearby village where Krishna wants a certain magazine, and Hans has come to shop for one specific item. We have money for Popular Mechanics Pa? Krishna asked. Your ma say you have enough books for now, Hans said. She want you to finish the ones you have. I read them out, Pa, and read them over. Hans gave his son a smile. We're going to get that Popular Mechanics then. Hans turned to his nephew. What you want from India, Tarak? Tarak chuckled. He wasn't expecting anything. He'd just come for the walk. He shyly pointed at the candy jars. From the doorstep, Hans smiled at the pretty cashier, rubbing his hands together as if a hot meal had been placed before him. The woman's face fell as she signaled to a young, lanky man in suspenders. A patchy beard, but his hair slicked into a smooth dome. He had been stacking tins of pomade into a tiny pyramid. The man came to the door, held up an authorial hand to the two, and shook his head. Something wrong, mister? Hans asked. The man folded his scrawny arms, his eyes on Hans's tattered work boots, scrunching his nose as if he just smelled a fart. Only one of you, he said. He looked to be in his 20s, several years younger than Hans. Hans thought about the sentence for a while. Only one of we could come in? I only have one pair of eyes, said the man with a nod. Krishna craned his neck to observe the patrons inside. There were at least two mothers with their children. Scowling at the man, he asked, What are you saying here, mister? Tarak hunched over, stayed quiet. The man kept eye contact with Hans. The boys stay outside. Hans nodded. Yes, sir. So what about them in there? Krishna pointed to the children in the store. Quiet, said Hans, his palm on the boy's back. The man kept his gaze on Hans. We've had bad experiences, and I only have one pair of eyes. Bad experiences with what? We have money. We ain't stealing nothing from your stupid store, Krishna said to the man. Turned to his father. Tell him something, pa. Call him a jackass. Hans covered the boy's mouth. Tarak gently pulled his cousin closer to him. The man sneered. This is a family store. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to... Hold on, sir. Hans held up his hand, put on a smile for the man. I come to get one thing from this hardware, and that's it, sir. I have the money. He pulled some bills out of his pocket. See? But pa, hush, I say. Hans lightly smacked the boy on the back of his head. The man thought about it for a few seconds. Okay, go ahead. Then pointed to Krishna. But this one, say another word, I'm phoning the police. Yes, sir. In and out, Hans said. Gave Krishna a stern glance.
So just before we took the reading, we were discussing quite a lot about the flawed nature of many of the characters. And I think most of the characters, if not all, were flawed. And Paul was speaking about the human nature that all of us, most of us are, inherently decent, but sometimes we slip up. So what I wanted to get was, given that most of the characters are flawed and some are reprehensible, how does the novelist draw the line between flawed and reprehensible? And while you're doing that, you could also say who you think the flawed characters are and who are the reprehensible ones.
Well, definitely Hans is flawed.
And not
Definitely.
reprehensible.
No, I didn't think, I thought he did something terrible, but I didn't think he was a fundamentally terrible human being. He was a decent human being who made some really bad choices. And the thing is too, I people like that. Well, it's a different thought. But okay, who is flawed? Who is reprehensible? Hans is flawed. He's not reprehensible. Marley is flawed. To me, even though I know you'll fight me on this, I don't believe Marley is reprehensible. Changor is very close to reprehensible, but I give him some credit because he obviously has a serious mental illness. But maybe all people who are reprehensible have serious mental illnesses. The twins' father is reprehensible. And Kevin Hosein did not give us any. No, we did see his terrible childhood. So, but he's reprehensible, definitely. Mikey Badri's father, the policeman, he's reprehensible. Yeah, I seem to be considering a lot of people reprehensible. Eric was about to say something before I disturbed him.
Oh, well, you didn't disturb me, but thank you. I think every person in this text is flawed. Um, uh, Reprehensibility, yes, to people who really commit this violent crimes or abuses, definitely we can say those are reprehensible. Even those American servicemen um, that you know, I mean, well, they did something really, really reprehensible that is lodged in the beginning, and that story is done, but does it resonate with Marley? But I think I agree with Paula about Marley. Um, Marley is she's constantly. It seems to me that she's constantly reinventing herself. We see the reinvention in the beginning, and then there's a evolution of that in the middle, and then by the time we get to the end, it's like, mm, it's like we say where I'm from, well, she really smelling herself now. So I think her character evolves as she's going through this reinvention of herself, and also she tried to reinvent Hans as well. And I think Hans wanted to reinvent himself, and so is reinvention a flawed sense that we have of ourselves or who we want to be? I don't know, but definitely um, they're flawed. Lata's flawed. Krishna's flawed. The twins are flawed. Uh, Rookman is flawed. Uh, they're all Shweta is flawed. They're all flawed.
What the back to the question of like how he drew the line between the flawed characters and the reprehensible ones. For me, I think my reading of it was the reprehensible ones were the ones who did things based solely on the fact that they had power over someone. Like they weren't making bad choices. It wasn't circumstances leading them to do things. It was simply the fact that they had this power and they could wield it, and so they did. And that made them reprehensible to me. And but I also wanted to talk about the twins. We talked about the fact that Hossein set us up with putting Hans as this character, and then he made a choice, and you're like, what? And I feel like he kind of did the opposite with the twins, who were like the most maligned characters in the book, yet were the ones that consistently made much better choices than Krishna, for
So,
example.
so
I
you
thought
you
that was
thought they
really
were
interesting.
they were redeemed in the end.
I don't think there was really anything to redeem them from,
Mm,
to be honest. Like they had a bad reputation, which was based on what exactly? Just rumor and speculation on the fact that
mm.
their father was a crook, right? There was no proof of them actually doing anything terrible.
I think they made an overseer disappear though
You think
permanently.
you think that it was
Yes.
Oh,
them?
No, he did. That was
yeah.
definitely
There was
them.
it was not. It
That
was not
I
for
think
me.
it was
That was
very
not
clear that it was
conclusive.
them.
Okay, to me it wasn't conclusive. I
I,
think
I think it
I
was
think it
them
was written in a
myself,
way that you
Paula.
could think maybe it was, but it wasn't for me. It wasn't conclusive.
And that's not the only person they made
But I
disappear, but
wouldn't
we
hold
can't
it
spoil the
against
book.
them.
Yeah.
But I also wouldn't hold it against
No,
them because of the
definitely.
kind of childhood they
They
had,
had
you
right.
know?
But
Yeah.
that comes back
So
to the issue of power, and I think that's. I mean, what like Keshwa pointed out, this is a post. This is a we're living. They're living in a post emancipation, post slavery society. Even though people of Indian descent did not experience slavery, but still they experienced working in sugarcane fields and a type of semi-slavery in a post-emancipation society, in a colonial society. So the same, we could see similar dynamics. So these young men and others being impoverished, and they see this gap with those who have power over them. Yeah, they're going to resist. So I saw that incident, even though it's a small incident in the text. I definitely saw it through the eyes of slave resistance. you know. So yeah, I
And
think like
I
Paula
think
said,
I
I
think that's
can't blame
exactly
them.
how it was portrayed. I
Mhm.
think it was resistance. This man was doing something terrible, and they weren't having it. And they had been raised in an environment where they were taught to solve their problems with violence, and they did that.
Yeah. I think Eric's answers my question. My answers the question in terms of who is flawed and who is reprehensible for me. And I would say that the only characters I would class as reprehensible would be the American soldiers. And this would my answer is based on the fact that this only occurs a generation after the end of indentureship in Trinidad.
Mhm.
These are broken people. These are people who have literally been broken by the colonial plantation society.
Correct.
And so a lot of the violence that we see in the novel coming from the young men from their father is a legacy of indentureship, a legacy of exploitation of people, and in those circumstances where you're literally taught to divide and fight against each other. I mean, I could almost forgive them. I mean, not that I'm condoning violence or anything, but not forgive them. I could understand why they did what they did. There we go. Paula, you seem to disagree.
Oh no, I just don't believe that you should give people a blank check like that and say you've had a hard life, so you get a pass. I have a problem with that. People have to be responsible for their behavior. And let me add another fellow to the list of reprehensible characters, Mr. Beige. We've forgotten Beige. He was pretty reprehensible.
Is it
But
beige? I was pronouncing it baig, but I don't
but
know.
then I was pronouncing it beige, but then I probably sound terrible, but I also based his flawed character, his flawed nature on the sort of legacy of indentureship, because I remember there was the scene when, and I don't want to reveal too much, where he was trying to convince Robinson of why he should turn away from his religion, or something like that. But there was some flawed things going on there, and I think I also forgave that because of the time it occurred in, and in terms of the level of education that these people had as well. I would
I, I
definitely wouldn't forgive it in 2023.
I don't think he was. I wouldn't consider him reprehensible. I think he was just. I mean, he didn't do anything terribly evil. He was
What he did
just.
to Marley was not evil.
What did he was basically just trying to what's the word, extort. It was
Extort.
Yeah, it was
extortion.
extortion.
It was
That's
Reparations.
just.
But
extortion.
that's reprehensible, man.
That's
Was
a
That's
it
just.
reparations?
that's
But I don't know. I feel
But
like
she
I
had
don't
the
know.
money,
I
so
didn't
how bad? You're not
feel
trying
like
to
it
extort
didn't
someone who's
feel
going to sell their house
reprehensible
for
to
it.
me. I thought he was pretty dumb, but I didn't. I think he wasn't a very smart guy. And given that, in fact, nothing came of it,
I
to
mean, the
me, that
deft way in which Mali
handled that.
discovered that,
Yes, it
went to the
was what
source
was
of
great.
that was
That was
I was
smooth.
Team Marley for
Oh
that.
yes,
I
That
was
was
like,
but
yeah,
smooth.
you go,
I was
girl.
like, you go, girl, exactly. No,
That's a
I,
lesson
I,
to
I
learn
don't
how
know.
to
I think
spell words right.
Baig just try beige, or I don't know how his name is pronounced. To me, he was just a fella. He just said he gonna try a thing and see
mm,
what happened.
mm,
I wouldn't consider him reprehensible.
A tricky daddian for me. That's what it felt like.
mm. Very amateurish at what he did, though. Or not taking any credit away from Mali in the way she worked through that piece of sleuth work, but it was very amateurish. But two things I wanted to pick up on. I didn't want to lose the point with the Americans in Trinidad and the fact that they had more of a social influence in that era in Trinidad that Trinidadians do not discuss up to today. They speak about the presence of the Americans in a glossed over way, but I think Kevin Hussein, um, in the small bit that he featured, um, opened that can of worms, and it's something that Sparrow sang Gene and Dinah. Um, Sparrow again touched the surface of that, but the Americans, their presence in Chagrabs and Trinidad had a lot of immorality and a lot of exploitation, a lot of stuff that we should not forgive them for.
I agree there. But I mean, I'm kind of surprised that you said that it's glossed over because I learned about Gene and Dinah in secondary school when they were talking about Americans in the Caribbean,
But the way Gene and
and
Diane is presented is almost as if, well, it's fun, you know.
that is true. That
Mm.
is true. I don't think people get the underlying message of Gene and Dinah, or the lyrics. Guess what?
I was like, I know that song, but I didn't know that. I have to go back and listen to it. And
No,
what?
Gene
Guess
and
what?
Dinah, Rosita and Clementina on the corner posing.
Bet your
Yeah,
life is something they selling. What you think they're
yeah.
selling, Kesua?
Oh my Kesua. No, Kesua. That's
That's an
And she was
old song. I heard it as a
and she was
child.
selling it to the
I'm like,
Americans.
is that what Gina and Diana do?
Yankees
yes.
gone, Sparrow take over now.
Yeah.
But anyway, we shouldn't get distracted.
Yes.
We're
Uh,
talking about this novel.
yes. So
Kev-
one thing that I wanted to ask was, do you think women are central to the novel? Because we were speaking about Mali and how she went about investigating her blackmail. So do you think women are central to the novel?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was the thought I had probably midway into the text. Sweda, Rookman, um, that old lady was something else. Um, Even Nyla with her with that really bad pregnancy.
A difficult pregnancy. Yeah.
Um, Lata, uh, yeah, and Marley definitely. I think this was a woman centered novel, and the women characters really drove the story. And they had a sense of community, even though there was some bickering, but I think they really drove this text.
I
And
think
it was
done so in a
hit.
way that's very subtle, actually. Because I remember in the opening pages, you see these boys making a blood pact, and you're like, "Oh, is this Stand By Me in Trinidad?" Like, "Oh, what is this?" And like at the early stages of the book, I was a bit like, "Oh no, I can't read another boy coming of age story. I just can't. I just don't have it in me." I realized I really like a woman in my stories. I'm just over men at the moment, and yeah, then as the story progressed, I was like, oh, there's some interesting women in this story anyway. And actually, it's very subtly done because the male characters are in lots of ways the main characters, but like you say, Eric, the heart of the story resides with the women in lots of ways, and their choices and their agency in lots of ways is what shapes what happens in the world around them. I think in really key ways that it wasn't obvious going in, and that's how it was going to play. And I think it really struck me as interesting, particularly because it's such a comparison with Naipaul's work, right? Because he writes about very similar sorts of time periods, and in some ways similar communities. If I think about Miguel Street, it feels obviously Miguel Street's in Port of Spain, and this is in Chaguaramas, but we're also seeing a kind of wartime Indo-Caribbean community that's working class at root, and how they all kind of live together. And obviously, well, not obviously, but Naipaul's work is so much more
But
misogynistic.
guess what? Just to say, these people weren't working class. These people were highly impoverished. They weren't even
But
in
they're
this
working
novel.
people.
Well,
No,
The line
that's what sociologists call working class, Tony.
well, okay.
You obviously weren't a
I'm not a
you obviously
sociologist.
weren't a social
Okay.
science student.
I definitely am not. I humbly submit that. Yeah.
But
And what I liked about, I was gonna say,
yes, go
the
ahead, Francine.
presence of women in the novel is that we saw women, different women at different stages of a woman's life. There was a teenage girl. There was, Shrita, the mother, the wife and mother with a teenage kid. There was Rukmin, the older woman. There was Lala. I thought it was interesting that he showed so many different stages of being a woman, basically, in the book. I really liked that.
What I felt is that he was being, in my mind, typical of what the Caribbean society is. Very matrifocal, not necessarily it isn't patriarchal, um, a patriarchal society, but women are always the center of Caribbean life. I'm not saying that they are not subject to misogyny and all that, clearly, right? But what Kevin did in developing those women, to me, was very typical of what these societies are.
All
I
right.
disagree with you, the rest of you who think it's woman centered. I don't think it was woman centered. Women were important
Important,
to
yeah.
the, but I don't think it's a woman centered novel but not by a long stretch.
I don't think women centered, but I think that women are way more central considering that the main characters are men. I think is what that's how I was saying it. I think.
Certainly,
Yeah.
there's certainly this is not a misogynistic novel. Certainly not. But I don't think women were important because women are half of the human race, and I think Kevin is the kind of writer who just will represent women because they're half of the human race. But I don't believe that he had any kind of agenda to place women at the center of the story. I didn't see any kind of political agenda in that way,
Uh,
anything conscious
I,
like
I was
that.
about to. I was,
Kestrel, before you get in there, I was just wondering, Paul, like, could I take that as your final reflection on the novel? And Kestrel, you could give your final reflection as we're coming to the end of the show. What were you responding to?
I was gonna say I do think the power that certain women have and the powerlessness of other women. I mean, he's always concerned with the spaces that women occupy and the way that they relate to the broader communities that they're a part of. And in that sense, I think it is slightly woman centered. I've kind of take back my previous statement, but I think yeah, I don't know now. I've confused myself. But what I will say in terms of
Paul,
my final,
Paul has given you food for thought.
yeah, we'll continue this. My final statement on the novel is I think it's a wonderful book. It was for me it was a little bit slow going at the beginning, but once I got into it and the end, I was like, wow, this is not there's layers. And I think the joy of the characters, I think we haven't described it as an ensemble piece, but it is very much it's about a community, it's about the different people that inhabit this space. It's about the legacies of colonialism and enslavement and indenture. But it's also about violence, and how like violence begets violence. And I think that's probably one of the enduring messages of the novel, and he does it very poetically and beautifully. It's quite funny in places as well, which I didn't expect. But I really enjoyed this novel. Thank you, Kevin Hosein, for writing this.
Any final reflections, Tony?
I can echo exactly what Keswa said. That's easy. Certainly a multi-layered presentation. It was very well written. Um, Jarring in a lot of parts, I have to tell you, and disturbing. Um, it's not something you want to curl up in bed with at night and think that you're going to fall asleep, into your beauty sleep straight away. But, that's the beauty about the book as well. Um, it brought you face to face with that squalor that these people were living in, the barrack life. And as we started out the discussion about the collision of, wealth and poverty. Brilliant book.
Eric?
Yeah, it was well written, I mean, beautifully written. The words he has an arsenal of words. Um, I think every word had meaning. He did not waste a word. Some writers waste words. He did not waste a word. The scenes were so vivid, and even the harrowing scenes. Yes, they gripped you, and those harrowing scenes made me cringe. So that's the power of this prose that he had. Plus the story and the interconnectedness of the characters is so compelling. And toward the end, I'm reading this text. I'm saying, my goodness, this doesn't sound like the 1940s. It sounds like contemporary times. So as a historian, that makes me believe. I mean, I believe, but makes me think about the historical way of thinking in terms of change and continuity. That yes, this is late colonialism in the British Caribbean, but the issues are very much present, and those issues have really never gone away.
Francine?
Just basically to echo everything everyone said. This book, it was gripping. That's just such a good word for it. And I like how he kind of leads you there in the beginning. You're kind of being led. You're not too sure for well, I wasn't too sure what was happening, but I was happy to let him lead me to wherever he was taking me. And then as you see it developing, and how all the layers it all came together, and you know, you pick up the bits and you're like, okay, okay, so that's why, and the interconnectedness just finished beautifully in the end. And Tony, I did actually read this curled up in bed at night, as harrowing as it was. I do my best reading at night, but yeah, just absolutely beautifully written. I was in awe by the end of the story.
Yeah, I think I agree with everyone here, and the biology, the strong scientific aspect of the novel got me interested. And I think Hussein did a beautiful job of showing the natural landscape of Trinidad, of rural Trinidad, because here you have poverty, and you
Mhm.
might just be thinking barrack shacks, poorly built houses. But he really gave us the natural beauty of the area, in spite of all the terrible things that happen on the landscape. So I think that was really powerful. Well, that is all the time we have for reflections. But we have a very special program for you. The next time you see us, we'll be interviewing Kevin Jared Hussein. Thank you very much for joining us for reflections on Hungry Ghosts. See you next time.